Picture yourself standing inside an eyewear store. The lighting is soft and flattering, the kind that makes everything on the shelf look expensive. Rows of sunglasses sit under the glass like pieces of jewelry. You pick up a pair of Ray-Ban Wayfarers, turn them over in your hand, feel the solid weight of the arms, check the dark, clean lenses. Then you glance at the price tag, $249. You hesitate for a second, but you tell yourself that is simply what good sunglasses cost. You have believed that your whole life. So did your parents. So quite possibly did their parents. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Those exact sunglasses cost somewhere between $5 and $8 to actually manufacture. The lenses, the frame, the hinges, even the small logo stamped onto the arm, all of it, roughly the price of a sandwich. And the reason you are paying $249 for an $8 object has nothing to do with quality, materials, or clever design. It comes down to one simple fact. A single company controls almost the entire eyewear industry on planet Earth. It manufactures the glasses. It owns the stores that sell them. It runs a major vision insurance plan that decides how much of the bill gets covered. It even owns most of the brands you assumed were competing against each other on the same shelf. And it has been quietly running this system for more than 60 years, while roughly 4.4 billion people worldwide who need corrective lenses simply paid whatever number appeared on the tag. That company is called Essilor-Luxottica. The man who built the foundation of it grew up in an orphanage in Milan, and the place quietly chipping away at that empire today is a city in eastern China that most people outside the eyewear trade have never even heard of. The story of how one company ended up controlling so much of your eyesight begins somewhere you would probably never expect, an orphanage in post-war Milan. Leonardo Del Vecchio was born there in 1935. His father died while he was still young, and his mother, unable to support the whole family on her own, placed him in a children's home where he grew up without adoption, without wealth, and without any real connections to fall back on. At 14, he was apprenticed to a tool and die maker, a small metalworking shop where he learned to cut and shape precise components by hand, to build molds, to work with a level of accuracy most people never bothered to develop. It was unglamorous, physically demanding work, but it handed him a genuinely rare skill set. In 1961, at just 26 years old, Del Vecchio opened a small workshop in Agordo, a mountain town tucked deep in the Italian Dolomites, surrounded by peaks and very little else. He started out producing metal components for eyeglass frames, not finished glasses. Just the small parts, hinges, temples, and nose pads, which he sold onto other eyewear manufacturers. The workshop employed only a handful of people, and almost nobody outside the immediate region had any idea it existed. Del Vecchio worked with his own hands on every mold, every press, every piece of finishing equipment in the building. He was not some polished businessman in a suit making deals from an office. He was a craftsman who happened to notice something crucial, that the profit margins hiding inside eyewear components were genuinely excellent. Over roughly the next decade, Del Vecchio's ambitions grew steadily alongside his workshop. He moved from manufacturing parts to manufacturing complete frames. Then he moved from producing frames for other companies to producing frames under his own name. Then, once his own brand was established, he began buying up other people's brands entirely. Each move was deliberate, carefully calculated, and rarely reversed. He named the growing company Luxottica, and he ran it with the quiet, relentless focus of a man who had grown up with nothing and understood exactly what it felt like to have no say over his own circumstances. He was constructing a machine designed to hand him control over an entire global industry, and he never really stopped expanding it for the rest of his life. What happened over the following decades is one of the most patient and methodical corporate consolidations in modern business history, carried out so gradually that most ordinary shoppers never noticed it happening at all. By the time anyone outside the industry started paying attention, the structure was already firmly in place. In 1990, Del Vecchio took Luxottica public, listing it not in Milan or Rome, but on the New York Stock Exchange, because that was where the serious capital lived and because the United States represented the largest eyewear market on the planet. He reportedly told an interviewer around that time that if you have to set sail, you might as well choose the biggest ocean available. He used the money raised from that listing to start acquiring companies at an aggressive pace. He bought Vogue Eyewear in 1990. In 1995, he pulled off a hostile takeover of LensCrafters through its parent company, United States Shoe Corporation, a business roughly 5 times the size of Luxottica at the time, an almost unthinkable move for a relatively small Italian eyewear maker to pull off successfully. In 2001, he acquired Sunglass Hut, instantly handing him access to thousands of retail storefronts scattered across the globe. And in 1999, he purchased Ray-Ban outright for $640 million, a price that industry analysts openly criticized as far too generous at the time. Del Vecchio did not seem to care much about that criticism because he already knew exactly what he intended to do with the brand once he owned it. Before Del Vecchio bought Ray-Ban, a standard pair of Wayfarers sold for around $30, the kind of casual purchase you might grab at a gas station or drugstore without giving it much thought. Popular, sure, but never treated as a luxury item. Del Vecchio moved quickly to reposition the entire brand. He pulled Wayfarers out of gas stations and drugstores almost immediately. He raised the price substantially. He placed them exclusively inside Sunglass Hut, which he now owned, and inside LensCrafters, which he also now owned, and began marketing them explicitly as a premium, aspirational product rather than a casual accessory. Within just a few years, the same pair of Wayfarers that had once sold for around $30 was routinely selling for well over $150. Today, that same essentially unchanged design regularly sells for more than $200. The lens has not changed, the frame construction has not meaningfully changed, the hinge mechanism has not changed. The only real variable that shifted was who owned the brand and what price that owner decided to charge for it. But the single acquisition that most clearly revealed exactly how this entire machine actually operated was Oakley, and it is the part of the story people tend to remember most vividly once they hear the full sequence of events, because it genuinely sounds like something pulled from a crime drama rather than an ordinary corporate transaction. In the early 2000s, Oakley stood as one of the biggest and most respected eyewear brands in the world, beloved by professional athletes, with a strong reputation built on genuine innovation, durability, and performance engineering. Oakley was still fully independent at that time, not owned by Luxottica, and its products were selling extremely well on the shelves inside Sunglass Hut, which Luxottica did own. Then, a pricing dispute broke out between Oakley and Luxottica. The precise details of that disagreement remain murky even now, but the outcome was anything but ambiguous. Luxottica pulled Oakley's products off Sunglass Hut shelves entirely. Almost overnight, Oakley lost direct access to the largest specialty sunglasses retail network in the world. Its stock price collapsed, roughly cutting in half within a fairly short period. A company that had been performing strongly suddenly looked deeply troubled, not because its products had gotten any worse and not because customer demand had genuinely dried up, but because a single company controlled the retail shelf space and had made a deliberate decision to remove Oakley from it. Then in 2007, with Oakley's stock price still noticeably depressed from the fallout of losing that critical retail channel, Luxottica acquired the company outright for roughly $2.1 billion. The company that had controlled the shelf space had effectively starved a competing brand of retail access, watched its valuation fall, and then purchased it at a meaningfully reduced price. Jim Jannard, the man who had originally founded Oakley back in 1975, selling motorcycle handlebar grips out of a garage, watched his own life's work eventually get absorbed into the very corporate machine he had spent years competing against. Once Oakley officially became part of Luxottica, its products went straight back onto Sunglass Hut shelves, prices climbed again, and business resumed as normal. Except now, Luxottica effectively controlled both sides of that entire transaction at once. Within the industry, the Oakley acquisition functioned as more than a simple business deal. It sent a clear message to every remaining independent eyewear brand on the planet that challenging Luxottica on pricing carried a very real risk of having your products pulled from its retail network, watching your valuation drop, and then potentially being acquired for less than your company was genuinely worth. Very few brands seriously tested that boundary again afterward. After absorbing Oakley, Luxottica kept expanding its reach, this time primarily through licensing agreements with major fashion houses eager to put their name on eyewear without handling any of the actual design or manufacturing work themselves. Prada, Chanel, Versace, Armani, Burberry, Dolce & Gabbana, Ralph Lauren, Tiffany, Michael Kors, Coach, Valentino, and Tory Burch all eventually signed on, and the list kept growing year after year. Each arrangement followed roughly the same basic pattern. The fashion house contributed its name and reputation. Luxottica designed the frames, manufactured them, distributed them, and placed them inside its own retail stores. The fashion house collected a royalty payment for the use of its brand, and the customer paid several $100s for a frame that had frequently rolled off the very same production line as a far cheaper pair sitting just a shelf or two below it, with the only meaningful difference being which logo happened to be stamped onto the temple arm. In 2018, Luxottica merged with Essilor, at the time already the world's largest manufacturer of prescription lenses. The newly combined company, Essilor-Luxottica, now controlled both the frames and the lenses that go inside them, alongside the brands, the manufacturing capacity, and the retail stores selling all of it. It also controlled one additional piece that most consumers never fully realize exists, and this is arguably the detail that turns the whole arrangement from a simple business story into something closer to a closed loop. Through its holdings, Essilor-Luxottica has a major stake in vision insurance in the United States, a business covering tens of millions of members nationwide. So when your eye doctor tells you your insurance covers frames up to a certain dollar amount at participating retailers, there is a genuine possibility that the company writing that insurance benefit the retailer selling you the frames, and the manufacturer that actually produced those frames are all connected under the same corporate umbrella. At no point in that entire journey is the average consumer actually interacting with an open, competitive market in any meaningful sense. Nearly every step along the way has been shaped by the same underlying company. Try imagining this arrangement transplanted into almost any other industry. Picture a single automaker owning nearly every dealership in the country, manufacturing most of the cars on the road, running one of the largest auto insurance providers, and setting prices with barely any competing manufacturer occupying the same lot. People would immediately call that a scandal. In eyewear, most people simply never noticed it was happening in the first place. By the time Leonardo Del Vecchio passed away from pneumonia in June of 2022 at 87 years old, the orphan who had started out learning to shape metal in a small Milan workshop had become one of the wealthiest people in Italy. The company he built kept operating smoothly without him, and by 2285, EssilorLuxottica reported full-year consolidated revenue of roughly 28.5 billion euros, an increase of more than 11% from the year before, with the company employing well over 200,000 people worldwide across dozens of manufacturing sites and thousands of retail locations spanning more than 150 countries. Here is where the story genuinely turns, because everything described so far would likely remain permanent and essentially unchallengeable, if not for a small city in eastern China that most people outside the eyewear trade have simply never heard of. Danyang sits in Jiangsu province, roughly 2 hours west of Shanghai by high-speed rail, with a population under 1 million people. If you had never traveled to China and someone pointed it out on a map, there would be little reason to look twice. It sits along the Yangtze River Delta, surrounded largely by farmland and modest light industry, and nothing about its appearance suggests it functions as the center of anything significant. Yet Danyang carries a widely used nickname, the eyewear capital of the world, and once you actually look at the numbers behind that nickname, it stops sounding like exaggerated marketing and starts sounding like a genuine understatement. The city produces more than 400 million spectacle lenses every single year, accounting for roughly 3/4 of China's entire domestic lens output and close to half of total global lens production. Half of the corrective lenses worn anywhere on the planet, across every brand in every country, trace back at least partly to this one city of under 1 million residents. Danyang also manufactures over 100 million pairs of frames annually, representing close to 1/3 of China's total frame output nationwide. More than 1,600 companies now operate within its eyewear sector, employing tens of thousands of local workers and generating billions of dollars in annual revenue, with exports alone regularly exceeding $600 million a year and continuing to grow at a healthy pace, even through periods of broader global economic uncertainty. The industry's origin story in Danyang echoes a familiar pattern seen across several specialized Chinese manufacturing hubs. Back in the 1960s, a group of educated young workers who had previously worked inside lens factories in Shanghai and Suzhou were relocated to the countryside during a period of significant political upheaval. They arrived in Danyang carrying little beyond the technical skills they had picked up back in the city. Small workshops gradually began appearing. People who understood how to grind glass properly taught their neighbors the same techniques, and those neighbors passed the knowledge on to their own families in turn. By the 1980s, an entire informal cottage industry had taken shape around lens production, using basic equipment and producing genuinely inconsistent quality, but at a growing volume and at a fraction of what established European or Japanese manufacturers were charging for comparable products. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Danyang steadily transformed itself. Local government invested heavily in dedicated industrial parks, brought in outside technology and capital, and pushed local manufacturers to seriously raise their quality standards rather than compete purely on volume and price. Companies that had once produced fairly basic low-grade lenses began investing meaningfully in research and development, forming partnerships with universities based in Shanghai and Nanjing, and purchasing precision coating and grinding equipment that matched what leading factories in Germany and Japan were already using. In 2014, a Danyang-based company called Dingxin Machinery successfully developed China's first domestically manufactured coating machine, specifically designed for spectacle lenses, breaking a long-standing foreign monopoly on the equipment responsible for applying the anti-reflective and scratch-resistant coatings that modern lenses require. Today, Danyang no longer produces only cheap, basic lenses. It manufactures lenses featuring the same multi-layer optical coatings, blue light filtering technology, ultraviolet protection, and precision grinding that premium global brands routinely advertise as their key selling points. The gap in optical performance between a typical Danyang lens and one produced in Germany or Japan, once genuinely significant, has narrowed to the point where many consumers, and even a fair number of opticians, cannot reliably tell the difference without directly checking the packaging. Some of the very same factories producing lenses sold under domestic Chinese brands also produce lenses that end up inside frames sold under well-known European and American brand names within Western optical retail chains. Different box, different logo, frequently the exact same lens underneath. Zenni Optical understood this dynamic earlier than most Western competitors did. Founded back in 2003, the company built its entire business model around a fairly simple idea that cut straight through decades of manufactured scarcity, source lenses and frames directly from Chinese manufacturers, list them on a website, and sell finished prescription glasses to American customers at a fraction of what they would typically pay inside a traditional optical retail chain. No retail storefronts to pay rent on, no licensing royalties flowing to fashion houses, and critically, no significant markup sitting between the factory floor and the customer's mailbox. A complete pair of prescription glasses on Zenni can start at under $10, including full prescription lenses, an anti-reflective coating, and a frame. Even the site's most expensive frame options rarely climb past $50. Zenni has reportedly sold well over 50 million pairs of glasses to date, a figure that places it firmly outside the category of a small niche online retailer and squarely inside the category of a genuine mass market competitor, one that exists specifically because Chinese manufacturing can produce a comparable product for a fraction of the cost and ship it directly to the person who will actually wear it. Warby Parker approached the same underlying problem from a different angle entirely, starting from the American side of the equation instead. The company's origin story has become something of a well-worn legend within startup circles at this point. One of its founders reportedly forgot his glasses during a trip and went to get a replacement pair, only to be quoted around $700 by the optician. Staring at that price, he reportedly thought about the fact that the smartphone already sitting in his pocket, a device packed with a processor, a camera, GPS navigation, a touchscreen, and a cellular radio, had actually cost him less than 2 small pieces of shaped plastic and glass. Warby Parker launched in 2010, selling reasonably stylish prescription glasses online for around $95 a pair. The company eventually expanded into more than 200 physical retail locations and went public in 2021 at a valuation exceeding $6 billion. Warby Parker never came close to ending EssilorLuxottica's overall dominance of the industry, but it proved something genuinely important along the way. That consumers were more than willing to switch the moment a credible alternative appeared at a price that did not feel deliberately inflated. Here is the detail that ties this entire story together, and it also tends to be the hardest part for people to fully accept once they hear it. When you walk into a retail store and pick up a pair of Ray-Ban Wayfarers priced at roughly $249, then later go home and order a comparable pair of sunglasses online for a fraction of that price, there is a genuine possibility that the lenses inside both pairs were manufactured in the very same city, possibly within the same industrial park, potentially on production lines run by the same workers using the same raw materials and equipment. A Danyang factory generally does not particularly care whose logo ends up printed on the temple arm. It manufactures lenses in bulk and sells them to whichever buyer places the order, and its underlying profit margin stays roughly consistent, whether that lens eventually ends up inside a $300 frame or a $15 one. The only real variable that shifts is how much the final customer ends up paying at the retail counter. The broader numbers on the consumer side have genuinely started to shift in recent years. Online eyewear sales have been growing at a steady double-digit rate globally for roughly the past 5 years running. Within the United States specifically, the share of prescription glasses purchased online has climbed from under 3% back in 2015 to well over 15% by 2025, with that figure skewing noticeably higher among younger buyers who feel more comfortable shopping online and less emotionally attached to the assumption that glasses inherently have to be expensive. Every percentage point of sales that shifts online effectively represents a percentage point bypassing EssilorLuxottica's traditional retail network entirely. Every pair sold for $20 instead of $250 represents a genuine crack forming somewhere in that wall. None of this means EssilorLuxottica is heading toward collapse anytime soon. The company remains, by a considerable margin, the single most powerful player in global eyewear. But the underlying pattern here closely resembles what has already played out repeatedly in other industries once a long-standing monopoly collided head-on with the internet and low-cost Chinese manufacturing at the same moment. The music industry once assumed piracy was a passing phase. Traditional taxi companies once assumed ride-sharing apps were a temporary gimmick. Established bookstores once assumed online retail was little more than a novelty. Incumbents almost always assume disruption will stay safely confined to the margins. It rarely ever does. Roughly 4.4 billion people on this planet need corrective lenses of some kind, well over half of the entire global population. For decades, a significant share of them have been paying prices ultimately set by a single company that simultaneously manufactures distributes, retails, and insures the exact same product from one end of the process to the other. An orphan from Milan built a system so thoroughly complete that most ordinary consumers never realized they were operating fully inside it. And now a city of under 1 million people in eastern China is manufacturing a comparable product at comparable quality for a small fraction of the price, shipping it directly to customers who are increasingly starting to ask the exact question this entire system was never designed to survive. Why does this actually cost so much? Once you genuinely understand the answer, it becomes very difficult to unsee. So picture yourself back where we started, standing inside that eyewear store under the soft, flattering lighting. That same pair of Ray-Ban Wayfarers sitting in front of you, priced at $249. The person behind the counter smiles and calls them a classic, timeless, genuinely worth the investment. Except now you know the frame likely cost somewhere around $5 to $8 to actually produce. You know that the same overarching company owns the brand, the store you are standing in, the lens technology behind the product, and quite possibly a meaningful piece of the insurance plan helping to cover the bill. You know that an orphan from Milan built one of the most complete vertically integrated monopolies in modern consumer goods, largely without most people ever noticing it existed. And you know that a city in China you had never heard of 10 minutes ago now produces roughly half the lenses worn on the entire planet and can sell you a comparable pair of glasses for roughly the price of a coffee. Maybe you put the Wayfarers back down on the shelf. Or maybe you buy them anyway because you genuinely like how they look and you can comfortably afford them. Either way, you are no longer making that particular decision in the dark.